Hello everyone, welcome to MSApti webcast. In this video, we are going to see the steps on how to create and apply Disk Encryption Policy to Windows 10 device to enable BitLocker without TPM in Intune. A common security capability for all devices is to encrypt the disk and the data. Windows utilize BitLocker as its disk encryption mechanism, and BitLocker is available on devices that run Windows 10 or Windows 11. To protect data at rest on our Intune managed Windows devices, BitLocker disk encryption can be applied automatically using the BitLocker CSP. BitLocker is a built-in Windows data protection feature capable of encrypting entire hard drives, including both system and data drives. Some settings for BitLocker may also require the device have a supported Trusted Platform module known as a TPM module. On the other hand, macOS uses Firewall disk encryption. There are two ways to enable and enforce BitLocker within Windows 10 and Windows 11. We can use one of the available policy types in Intune to configure it within managed devices. Firstly, Endpoint Security Disk Encryption Policy for BitLocker. This is a BitLocker profile with grouped settings that are dedicated to configuring BitLocker. Second, Device Configuration Profile for Endpoint Protection for BitLocker. In this video, we will use Disk Encryption Policy from Endpoint Security. With Disk Encryption Policy, we can also configure a BitLocker policy to automatically and silently enable BitLocker on a device. That means that BitLocker enables successfully without presenting any user interface to the end user, even when that user isn't a local administrator on the device. We can use either the BitLocker profile from an Endpoint Security Disk Encryption Policy or the Endpoint Protection template from the Device Configuration Policy. If you don't have a compatible TPM, we can still go with encryption process, but we will lose the benefits such as integrity verification offered by BitLocker with a TPM. In this example, we want to enable BitLocker disk encryption on Windows 10 device without TPM chip. Since we don't have TPM chip on our Windows 10 device, we cannot enable silent encryption using disk encryption policy on our device. Sign in to the Microsoft Endpoint Manager Admin Center as a global administrator or an Intune service administrator. We can access Microsoft Endpoint Manager using the URL https endpoint.microsoft.com. On homepage, click on Devices. Click on Monitor. Under Configuration, click on Encryption Report. We can see the encryption report for our test Windows 10 device lab win10-DE01. Since we don't have TPM chip on our Windows 10 device, TPM version status is unknown, and this device is not eligible for encryption. If you have older devices without TPM, you will not be able to encrypt them silently. This means we have to configure multiple policies in order to enable BitLocker disk encryption on that device. So we have to set up some policy settings in order to use BitLocker encryption on our device without TPM. Click on Endpoint Security. Under Manage, click on Disk Encryption. Click on Create Policy plus icon. On the Create a Profile blade, under Platform, select Windows 10 and later. Select Profile Type as BitLocker. click on Create button. Provide a meaningful name for this disk encryption profile. We have given name Test Windows BitLocker Disk Encryption Policy and added a description for this policy. Description is optional. Click on Next. On this page, we can see all the settings related to disk encryption. Base settings is the first section where we configure silent enforcement of BitLocker. In this example, we will only enable setting Enable full disk encryption for OS and fixed data drive. Set the value to Yes. Hide prompt about third-party encryption is a prerequisite to silent encryption, which is an automated approach that does not require end-user intervention. If a device does not have a TPM and you want to configure startup authentication, make sure that hide prompt about third-party encryption is set to not configured in base settings. This will ensure the user is prompted with a notification when the BitLocker policy arrives on the device. We are also going to configure client-driven recovery password rotation setting. Setting it to key rotation enabled for Azure AD joined devices will allow key rotation for Azure AD joined devices. Next, we have fixed drive settings. Fixed drive settings apply to additional internal disks a device may have. This could be separate partitions on the main disk or a second disk installed on a computer. Essentially, we recommend setting things up so it enforces BitLocker with the highest encryption method, which is AES XTS 256, requires a recovery password to be set, also known as a recovery key, and backs up the key to Azure Active Directory. Now first, I'm going to configure BitLocker fixed drive policy. Let me click on Configure. Next, we are going to configure encryption method AES XTS 256-bit for fixed data drive. Let me select it. At a minimum, we are going to configure these two settings for fixed drive settings. Next, we have BitLocker OS drive settings. Operating system drives are controlled by OS drive settings, and those settings are mostly the same as fixed data drives, plus with some more settings for startup and keys too. First of all, click on Configure for the BitLocker system drive policy setting. For startup authentication required, set this setting to Yes. We can take our pointer over here to get more information about each and every settings here. In this example, we want to encrypt device without a TPM, so we need to set disable BitLocker on devices where TPM is incompatible to not configured. This setting is part of the startup authentication settings. We also need to set allowed for all 4 TPM related settings under startup authentication. So let me set those value to allowed. Remember, we are modifying these settings because we don't have TPM chip on our Windows 10 device. Next, we need to click on Configure to set up the system drive recovery settings. So let me click on Configure, and then we have lots of options related to system drive recovery. For recovery key file creation, set this to allow. Setting this to allow will allow an admin user to create a 256-bit recovery key file manually. Ensure both recovery device to backup recovery information to Azure Active Directory and recovery password creation are set to required. Let me select Yes, and here we need to select required. This will ensure the device always has a recovery key created and saved in Azure Active Directory. Now next, ensure both hide recovery options during BitLocker setup and enable BitLocker after recovery information to store are set to yes. So let me set those two settings to yes. Hide recovery options during BitLocker setup is set to yes, and enable BitLocker after recovery information to store is also set to yes. Next, you can also set up a minimum pin length if you are going to use pin. The pin length must be between 4 and 20 digits. If you do not configure this setting, users are able to configure a startup pin of any length between 4 and 20 digits. We are not going to set up minimum pin length as we are going to use password in this example. We want to enforce BitLocker with the highest encryption method, which is AES 256-bit XTS. So let me select that option, AES 256-bit XTS. Okay, so we have successfully configured all the required settings for OS drive settings. Next, we have removable drive settings. Unfortunately, even if you don't plan to encrypt your USB keys with BitLocker, you still have to configure this section. It won't let you save the profile if you don't set an encryption type for removable drives. So select Configure for BitLocker Removable Drive Policy. And next, configure encryption method to AES 256-bit XTS. So we have configured encryption method AES 256-bit XTS for removable data drives. Click Next to continue. So we have successfully configured all the required settings for disk encryption. In scope tags page, click on Next as we are not going to use scope tags. In the assignments page, we can define the targets. We can apply these settings to selected groups, all users or all devices. In our demo, we will use our test device group. To select the group, click on Add Groups. We will select our test device group named Test DE Client. Click on Select. Make sure Group is selected. Click Next to continue. On the last page, review the settings which you have selected. Click on Create to set up the profile. We can see the message, Profile created successfully. It will take some time to apply these settings on targeted devices. To see the result, let's go to a Windows 10 device. First of all, I'm going to initiate the manual sync with Intune. So let me click on Sync. This Windows 10 device is part of the targeted group Test DE Client. The hostname of this Windows 10 device is labwin10-de01. Okay, last sync was successful, but still we haven't received any notification. So again, I'm going to click on Sync and let's wait for the notification. It may take some time until notification shows up on your device. We can see the notification about encryption needed. Here we can see the information. Your work or school requires this device to be encrypted. Select this notification to encrypt this device. So once you click on this notification, it will start the encryption process. It will give you one window, and using that, we can complete the encryption process on this Windows 10 device. So let me click on this notification. And even if you close this notification, there will be another notification about encryption needed. So it may take some time until this notification shows up on your device. So this is the first window which we will see when we click on that notification. On the Are you ready to start encryption dialog, select the checkbox next to I don't have any other disk encryption software installed. Encrypt all my disk. And after selecting the checkbox, click on Yes. This will start the encryption wizard. We can see it is checking our system configuration. On the Choose how to unlock your drive at startup, we will select enter a password. So let me click on enter a password. Enter and re-enter a strong password. After specifying strong password, click next. On the choose how much of your drive to encrypt page, select encrypt use disk space only, and that is selected. See, since this is a test device, we have selected use disk space only option. Click on next. It is asking us for the confirmation that are you ready to encrypt this drive. Click on continue. The encryption process will start automatically. As you can see, the process is started successfully. See why it directly reached to 92%? Because that much of space is available on our system drive. This will take some time to complete the encryption process on this device. As you can see, encryption process is completed successfully. We can see the message, encryption of C is complete. Click on close. I'm going to restart this Windows 10 device. After restart, we need to enter the password to unlock the system drive. And press enter to unlock the drive. After successfully password verification, system will start a booting process. At login screen, enter a user's PIN to sign in. So the encryption process was completed successfully. Now let's verify BitLocker protection on our system drive. On the taskbar, select File Explorer. Click on this PC. We can see the lock icon on our system drive. Right-click on local disk C and then select Manage BitLocker. Ensure that you see C BitLocker on. This means that drive is protected. In our case, it is a C drive. Here we have several other options like backup, a recovery key, or change your password. The recovery key is automatically backup on Azure Active Directory, but still I suggest that take a backup of recovery key and save somewhere safe. So we can say we have successfully configured BitLocker Disk Encryption by using Intune. I'm going to initiate the sync with Intune. So let me minimize this too. And let's initiate manual sync with our Intune. Let's go back to Microsoft Endpoint Manager Admin Center. Click on the profile which we have created earlier. Under Monitor, click on Device Status. Here we can see the status of the policy assignment. Assignment succeeded on our test Windows 10 device named Lab Win10-DE01. Click on Devices, Monitor. Under Configuration, click on Encryption Report. Check the encryption status of our test Windows 10 device, and I think the status is not updated yet. So let me click on Refresh. And that's why we have initiated the synchronization from our client computer, because we want to see that updated information here. But the information is still not updated. Let me click on Refresh and let's see what happens. Okay, status is not updated yet. This time we can see the status is changed for Lab Win10-D01. Encryption status is encrypted. See, there is no TPM, and that's why it is still showing us TPM version unknown, because we have configured encryption without TPM. We have configured to store BitLocker recovery key in Azure Active Directory. So let's check the BitLocker recovery key status. Again, click on Devices, click on All Devices, click on our test Windows 10 device name, which is Lab Win10-DE01. Under Monitor, click on Recovery Keys. Here we can see information about BitLocker recovery key. We can see BitLocker key ID, drive type and recovery key information. In our case, drive type is operating system drive. To see the BitLocker recovery key of this device, click on Show Recovery Key link. We can see the BitLocker recovery key of this Windows 10 device. Device name is there, BitLocker key ID, and here we have a BitLocker recovery key. We can use this recovery key if user forget his or her password. So that's all for this video on how to create and apply Disk Encryption Policy to Windows 10 device to enable BitLocker without TPM in Intune. Thank you all for watching this video. Have a nice day.